Okay. Wow. I definitely have egg on my face. Any of you who remember my really, really old streams, one of the topics that would come up semi-frequently is, what's your favorite, what's your least favorite when it comes to certain franchises, and Pixar would come up semi-frequently because it hits a lot of audiences. And I remember saying Finding Nemo wasn't one I particularly was fond of. And, of course, a lot of people are like, what? And they're like, oh my god, you're dumb? And then they'd smack me, and then they'd kill me. But after I got back up, I never really explained the reason why, because back then I was a little bit more quiet about personal details, but Finding Nemo came out when I was living on the streets. I didn't see it in the theaters. Obviously. Timing, I didn't really have money for food. I certainly didn't have money to go into the theaters. So what ended up happening is I ended up seeing parts of it with my girlfriend at the time. Long story. That would have sounded great, right? Yeah, who's your boyfriend? Oh, he's this bum. Anyways, I saw parts of it with her, after it had come out on home DVD or whatever. And I didn't see the whole thing because she didn't like to sit through whole movies like that, so we kind of piecemealed our way through it. And thanks to that and the circumstances of the time, I was left with a relatively bad impression of it, for reasons that are probably self-apparent. I never actually went back and rewatched it. This is my second time watching it, effectively my first. Now, if you remember, I talked before about how some of these films I haven't seen before. Whether this one qualifies or not is up to you, but this is the first one that comes close to qualifying. The first time I've really sat down and watched the whole film in one big go was this time right here. And damn, that hit in the feels way more than I was expecting. Oh my god. Back in Monsters, Inc., they actually did some research on how mammals, specifically large mammals, move and function to study the biology and the animation of how they process things and how they do things. This is all so they can make Sully animated a little bit better. Now I've talked before about the Pixar research thing, but that was probably the beginning of that, like the prototype of that. But this film was really the first research film, where they actually sat down and did a decent amount of time, actually went scuba diving themselves, for work purposes, wink wink, but also in order to study the coral reefs while they're there, and they also took classes on oceanography and fish biology. And they wanted to do something. And once again, we see how the animators are really just the stars of the show when it comes to Pixar. They wanted to animate fish in a way so that they would look like fish do. So that they wouldn't pull the old cartoon trick, Where it's just, it's a fish, but the way it moves and operates is completely like a human would. They wanted it to move and operate like a fish would. And if you pay attention, very close attention, especially in several scenes, you could see how that animation style is unique, distinct, and different from your typical animation style of most other works, especially ones that are aquatic in nature. Good stuff. Very good stuff. Definite praise there. And again, it would become something of a common trend going forwards. Pixar likes to do a lot of research, and then occasionally throw it out for a gag or a scene, but they still do the research to begin with. This is something that would continue. I guess up to Inside Out would be one of the more modern ones. I'm not sure exactly how far forward that goes, but it definitely goes forward a little bit. Anyways, so this is another benefit of Pixar's growing financial prominence. Now, if you've been paying attention, I've kind of paused the behind-the-scenes story of Pixar v. Disney, because it kind of was on pause. They had their big deal, and that big deal lasted until either Cars or Ratatouille, depending on who you ask. The reason why there's some wiggle room there is because during the development of Ratatouille, they asked for an extension and actually pushed Ratatouille back, specifically so the contract would be elongated along with the movie release. This is why Ratatouille was delayed. I'll get to the reasons why later. That's not going to come up for a bit. But my point is, at this point in history, the debate between the two and the fight between Steve Jobs and Mr. Eisner was not going super well. However, this film was the first crack in Disney's armor. Eisner is reported by multiple people, this is all hearsay, as being pretty anti-Pixar. He was irritated that the upstart Pixar dared to claim that they were the animation kings and to be the new kids on the block when obviously animation was Disney's wheelhouse, and that general attitude, whatever you're picturing, right? He was quoted, and this is something that's more likely to be true, as insisting that this particular film, Finding Nemo, would bomb. And, more importantly, that it would take Pixar down a peg. And that would help him at the negotiation tables. If you're not familiar with it, because you didn't watch My Incredibles Rumination, which came out last year, Finding Nemo was actually the smash success. While Toy Story was the Zelda 1 and proved the feasibility, and A Bug's Life and then Toy Story 2 proved that they had something going, the first real, no really, holy crap level of smash success was Finding Nemo. This, by the way, I told you I'd get back to it, is the Ocarina of Time of the franchise. This is the big popular one, the one everyone knows about, the one everyone likes, and the one that was, again, a success to the likes of which most others can't even compare. Whether it's the best or not, well, that's a lot more variable of a thing. If you ask 100 people, you get 100 different responses, yada yada. But this was without question the most successful one to date. Later that would be challenged by other films, but and it would actually, if I'm not mistaken, it would take quite a while. Hang on, let me look at my list here really quick here. So I have the list right here. So we've got Finding Nemo, Incredibles, which actually I'm going to be covering last year, but that would be next. Then Cars, Ratatouille, WALL-E, Up, Toy Story 3. That's the next one. I'll go ahead and tell you that in advance. So that's actually a bit more of a gap between Toy Story 3, which would be the next one to finally unseat this film as, as the big one. I suppose we could call that the Twilight Princess of the series, but actually it would probably be more accurate to call that one the Breath of the Wild if we're going to keep the Zelda thing going. But I'm getting off track. Smash success, which proved Eisner was wrong, and that his attitude was wrong, and that a lot of people probably should stop listening to him. It was one of those wonderful things where it's not like they lost money on this. It's just that he was proven to be so out of touch that he started losing a lot of his office clout. You know how that works, right? Office politics in general, especially in major corporations, tends to sit on intangibles more than actual tangibles. I mean, yeah, the dollar amount matters, but it's not like Eisner lost them any money. They made plenty of money on Finding Nemo. But the fact that he said it wouldn't means intangibly, he predicted this would be about what would have happened if he had been in charge. What if he had pulled the plug on this? We could have lost out on so much money, you guys. We need to do something about Eisner. It's probably worth noting that within about a year-ish, I'm not sure the exact timeline, sometime not too long after this film came out, Eisner would finally and eventually leave Disney. However, as of this moment, the negotiations between the two companies had flat out stalled. It reached a point where Jobs just flat out said, no, I'm done. I'm done dealing with Disney. We'll have our contract, which we've already signed, which we're legally bound to. That's it. We're walking. Now that's going to be the status quo pretty much up until Ratatouille. So that's probably the last time I'm going to mention that until we get to the Ratatouille rumination. Because that's just the state they were in. That also meant that Pixar got to keep most of the resources and funding and some of the IP and rights from what they were making in this period of time, including Incredibles and Up and whatever else comes out before Ratatouille. I was just looking at it, but I've already forgotten the list. That meant Pixar had even more time, money, resources, budget, political clout, etc. than they had before. So that was nice. This means they could start experimenting and stretching out a little bit. Now, I mentioned how Monsters, Inc. theory was designed to be more broad, more acceptable to a large audience. I feel like Finding Nemo was refining that just a little bit. This is Stanton, I'm pretty sure. Andrew Stanton, yep. And if I'm not mistaken, which I am, because... Yep, no, I'm not mistaken. Stanton was A Bug's Life. And, well, there's a parallel there, which I'll actually get into more later. But you can kind of see how in A Bug's Life, which dealt with relatively serious adult topics, what I would normally refer to as mature topics, like, tyranny and rule through terror and bullying and oppression and the kind of ideas of, you have to fit in or else you're not worthwhile and being stuck in traditionalism. Those kind of things. That's what I think of when I think of mature topics, generally speaking. So you'll notice that they kind of walked away from those, for the most part, with the last two films. Well, Monsters, Inc. had some decent world building and ideas, and Toy Story 2 certainly had a couple of nice moments. They were both more designed to be just fun films. Then this film comes around, Stanton again, and you can see how he's pushing more of those topics more to the forefront. If I might be so bold, A Bug's Life and Monsters, Inc., I think, are both the films that proved the core focus of what Pixar would be about for the next gabrillion years, with the occasional exception of the films that aren't quite as good. And that core focus would be people. They're really, really about human stories. It's all about the personal, identifiable, real tragedies or problems or difficulties or understandables or otherwise tasks that people go through during their day-to-day lives in ways that can relate to audiences. And in most cases, they tend to hit fairly adult and mature topics. I mean, again, Incredibles is probably the most obvious example of that. But think about several of the next upcoming films and some of the topics that they discuss. Think about Up, for God's sakes, which I've already done a rumination on at this point, and the topics it contains. Look at this film. While they continue to maintain the fantastical and the what if, concept film thing would continue all the way up until Soul, the last film we're covering and the last Pixar film I'm aware of, actually. As of this moment, they haven't even announced what they're doing after Soul. Maybe by the time this video goes live, you'll know. I don't know. Even up until Soul, the last one in the wheelhouse, or last one in the line, they're still doing that. They're still doing the concept to focus on the personal human story. And I think that's kind of the Pixar formula. And I think it works really well, as long as they can keep having tight script writing, good animation, good concepts, and very human feels. That's a harder thing to do than it sounds. And as you might imagine, there have been some dips in quality over the years. We're not there yet, though. Unlike what Eisner thought, this was not a dip in quality. This was a spike, if I might be so bold. In animation, in style, in storyboarding, in camera usage, and again, in the overall themes of the work. This was a bump up, not down. By the way, because I like to give these figures out, this had a $94 million budget. That includes the research and time spent pushing the tech. You'll notice they didn't push the tech another step further here. As I mentioned, Monsters, Inc. was the sea change. That was when they really developed the new tech to such an extensive extent. The next film where they would really do something similar would be The Incredibles. And that Incredibles might be the last time they have another significant bump up in tech. Everything else is probably just going to be scaling up. I could be wrong, but from my knowledge as of this moment, having not researched the future films, that appears to be the case. But despite that $94 million cost, this thing made $871 million. Yeah. And caused issues with clownfish in real life, huh? As so many people wanted them, and there were issues related to that. Go figure. This last point. I mentioned how they tackle more adult themes. And again, I feel like that is a trend going all the way up until Soul. But I really feel like that was a very strong trend right now. That because, or perhaps, I know this is bright and I know my glasses are reflecting. Sorry, I wanted to pull this up because I wanted to make sure I was right about this, and I am. Because our next several films are Finding Nemo, Incredibles, Cars, which does have an adult theme, Ratatouille, which, Wall-E, and Up, and then Toy Story 3. Now, the only possible on that is Ratatouille, which we'll discuss when we get there. But all of the other films I just mentioned, those are far more tilted towards adults and far more tilted towards the darker and more mature themes. And again, given the time, given what the company was going through, this is a logical progression. Some people call this Cerberus syndrome, and with good reason. But this is a very normal progression for a creative team. A lot of times they'll make something, and it'll be popular enough so they can keep making stuff. And just, I don't know, maybe this is just human nature, but one thing I've noticed over studying literally centuries of human literature is that writers will tend towards more complex, more mature, and more dark themes over time, until they get to the point where they start to analyze the really kind of stuff. Sometimes they go too far. Sometimes they cross the line over into darkier and edgier. But sometimes they just try to really settle in and try to tell far more complex storytelling. And since most mature topics are far more complex than bad guy and hero, you can see why this kind of thing might be such a normal and natural progression for any writing team or creative staff or individual writer that has enough time to develop their technique. So it makes perfect sense to me that these next several films we're covering, with the possible exception of Ratatouille, I'll explain when we get there, okay, are all going to be leaning towards that more darker, serious, mature tone. Okay. Nice neighborhood. Beautiful, beautiful showcasing of the reef there, if I might be so bold. Great Barrier Reef off the coast of Australia. No, I don't have an Australian accent. Don't ask me to. Thank you very much. No, instead, you'll notice how Marlin is immediately self-conscious. I find myself wondering if this is another thing that would become a Pixar standard. It might just be Stanton's standard. Because remember, Flick had this exact same problem, and indeed, so did a lot of characters in Bug's life. Being nervous or uncertain or having issues with self-worth. What if they don't like me? What if my children don't like me? Ouch. How many of you have ever had that thought? You don't have to answer. It's a very personal question. But I ask it because I want to prompt the question in your head. I want you to think about that thought and about the kind of thoughts that go through expecting parents' heads as they're expecting, as they're prepping and worrying and fretting, and they just stare at the next 20 years of their life and go, what if they don't like me? Mature, like I said, adult. And then at the 3-minute mark, she's killed, along with all the kids. Funny thing, by the way. Well, this is obviously just a boom punch right in the gut scene, and very effective. Not to the level of Up. I don't think anything's at the level of Up. Oh my god, that thing is a masterpiece of nightmare horror. But they do this in part because it wasn't the original plan at all. Originally, this was something that was going to be revealed in flashbacks throughout the course of the film. But as they kept showing it, they kept looking at it like, that just doesn't fit. It doesn't fit the pacing. It doesn't fit the tone. And finally, they just realized, you know what? It really doesn't fit. And they just smashed it right into the first 3 minutes of the film. Now, this is reportedly, asterisk, one of the biggest reasons why Eisner believed that Pixar had lost their touch. Oh, sure, you're going to have a big dark moment at the very beginning of the film. Like anyone's going to like that. Now, having said that, I'm sorry, I'm just thinking of like every movie that does that succeeds. There's quite a few. Having said that, you'll notice that even though they smashed it together, they do some quick and dirty, efficient exposition right off the bat. In fact, they even mention what is the most obvious theme of the film right in that first 3 minutes. The overprotectiveness. Now, that's the obvious theme. I'm actually not going to talk much about it because the film says everything it needs to. I'm going to talk more about the other themes in this work. But this is probably the best showcasing of the overprotectiveness theme in the entire work. Coral is out there. She looks down to the eggs, looks up at the barracuda, looks down, and then rushes down to the eggs, which catches the barracuda's attention, which draws it to the eggs, which gets her and all the eggs killed. Overprotectiveness. I'm not really blaming her. She was panicked, and there was a barracuda right there by where her kids were. Of course she was panicking. But you can see how that did happen, and actual bad happened. So, the lighting changes, things happen. Can I just say really quick that picking Hank Scorpio for Marlin was actually an inspired choice? I never would have picked him personally. While he is known to be a good voice actor and knows exactly how he's doing and likes to riff and is really good at it, I still have to admit, if I was the casting director, that would not have occurred to me in my first or even second pass. But he does great at it. He especially works very well off of Ellen DeGeneres, another person I would have never picked. But then again, Ellen DeGeneres also does the same kind of thing. She has a very fluid way of acting, especially voice acting, and she likes to riff. And the two kind of would riff off of each other, and thus we have that same thing. You'll notice how, by the way, the buddy formula keeps kind of propping up ever since Toy Story 1. It will continue to prop up in the future as well, of course. And it'll eventually kind of die out. We'll have a point in which we don't have the buddy formula anymore. But you notice how it's still just kind of peeking its head in every now and again? There's another reason for that, too. Don't worry, I will get to that. Everyone in the comments dives down to the comments. You're wrong. You're dumb. You're terrible. I should actually type for that. Hang on, let me pull up a random notepad so I can just type something here. There we go. You're wrong and you're dumb and you're terrible. There we go. Okay. Got that out of the way. I'm going to laugh if any actual comment said that. I really am. All right, so then we see the new home is way further away from the deep, from the cliff edge, and far more contained and far more surrounded by other people. Yeah. And we see the bad jokes. Quick note, Mr. Scorpio, I actually can't remember the actor's name, I'm sorry. The guy who plays Marlin. I'm not going to look it up. He apparently was asked to just tell bad jokes terribly. And just sat there and just started coming up with random terrible jokes. They only kept 2 of those takes in the film. But those are the 2 takes that he says here and then substantially later when he's talking to the sharks. Or not the sharks. I forget what he's talking about. The second time he does it, it's... No, it's the sharks. I'm right. Stop down here. Sorry. It's technically my first time watching this film. That's going to be fun when we get the films I really haven't seen before. God, I'm sorry. I have to gush about the Reef. It is absolutely visually gorgeous. I am nothing but astonished at how well done it is. Albert Brooks, that's his name. Albert Brooks. Shut up. The Reef is gorgeous. They do it. Again, while I was blown away by a lot of stuff they did in Monsters University, especially on a technical level, from a sheer gorgeous perspective, they do so much wonderful stuff at that Reef. They had to work with the lighting too to make it work, and that is another thing that needs to be separately mentioned on top of the brilliant animation of this place. Anyways, so Marlin is barely holding on, but he's like, it's like, okay, you gotta let your kids go and everything's cool. Wait, they're going to the drop-off? They're going off. Oh my God. Okay, real talk. How many of you out there have any kind of water phobia? Again, you don't have to say it. You don't have to actually share it. Just, think it or say it out loud and make your roommate be weirded out or something. Just shout out, yes, me! Don't actually do that. I don't want to wig out your roommates and or loved ones or siblings or friends or animals, parakeets. So the reason I mention that is anybody who's watched my stream of Subnautica knows that certain types of things in the water just make me go, and there's 3 things that hit me particularly. 1, okay, you poke your head out in the water and you look around and there's nothing but water in all directions. Okay. That's terrifying. It's partially terrifying because you don't know what you're looking at. You don't know how deep that water is or how far down it goes or anything. You just know that there's water and unknown in all directions. Second thing. So the second thing would be when there's you can't see anything. It's so dark or silty that you can't see the surface of the water and you can't see the bottom of the water. And so all you see is absolutely nothing in every direction. So that's terrifying. But the third one is those cliffs, those drop-offs underwater. Now, I've seen one of those in real life out on the coast of Maui. That scared the crap out of me. But those kind of things affect me even in video games. Subnautica is a good example, but I'll give you a really dumb example. World of Warcraft. For those of you not aware, you can go out under the water quite a ways. And if you're undead, you don't need to breathe, so you're fine. But it gets to a point where there is an actual, just a straight-up drop-off. And when I saw that actually legitimately wigged me out, like... And there's no reason for it to. There's nothing out there. There's nothing there. And the whole point of it being a drop-off is the Z-axis was just set to 0, so it just goes down to the base of the floor. But it's still kind of... And you look up and you can't see the water surface, and then you freak out. And what I'm trying to say here is, even ignoring his personal issues with the drop-off, thanks to what happened to his wife and children, you can see how this would affect someone, even a fish. You'll notice that most of the other kids are similarly, and even the adult, the teacher is like, okay, yeah, maybe we should stay together and let's not go over there. Let's be cautious here. Okay. Now, Marlin pushes too far and too hard. Notice the kids are surprisingly cool. The film skips over having bullies. Thank you, film. I mean, bullies are a thing, but at least for once the kids aren't bullies. While they were poking fun, they were also with it. You notice they also shared their own little foibles and problems when he revealed he had the limp, the bad fin, right? So when he's like, oh my God, it's like, no, it's our fault. He didn't actually go out there and do anything. It's our fault. We dared him to, but he was too scared to, it's okay. And this also leads to the teacher who tries to help out. And I feel like pointing out that the teacher also successfully gets the other kids away safely, quickly and efficiently when Marlin fails miserably. Marlin, of course, pushing way too far and way too hard is exactly why his son rushes off and does the foolish thing. Now, it's very easy to take away wrong lessons from a work like this. Because you might think the lesson is, screw it, do it. That's not the lesson. Because that's exactly what his son does, and that leads to all the problems of the issue. But the thing is, the only reason he did it that way was because his dad had no faith in him. So he didn't do it properly. He didn't think about it. He didn't process it. He didn't try or put the real effort into it. Instead, he just blindly rushed out and blindly got caught. If you do it properly, if you think about it, apply yourself, well, then you might be able to do crazy things and actually accomplish stuff. That is one of the more complex themes of the film. Far more interesting, in my opinion, than the overprotectiveness thing. Because many times in this film, everyone involved on both teams, as we're going through it, accomplish great things and surprising things because they weren't afraid. Well, that's the wrong way to put it. They were afraid, but they didn't let the fear stop them. But they tried to do something properly. They tried to put actual reasoning and thought into it other than just blindly, rah, like Nemo does at the beginning. And there are other examples of that too, but you get my point. Ellen DeGeneres, short-term memory loss. That sounds like hell to me. I wrote it down. What's it called? It's, anterograde? That doesn't sound right. I'm going to give up. I can't read my own handwriting. It's something grade. I think it's anterograde amnesia. It's not retrograde amnesia. It's a different thing. That sounds like some kind of hell. I can't even imagine living like that. I really can't. I often consider myself blessed because despite the fact that I have a terrible memory for names, I actually have an excellent memory, as I've talked about several times. There's a reason why I can sit here and discuss most of these things with only like 3 lines per note just to remind me of all the details. It's because all that stuff just stays up there. And you ask me about this stuff in 2 years, I'll probably remember all of these things as well, because that's just how my memory works. And I'm not saying this to brag, by the way. That's not the intent here. The intent is that's part of who I am. That's part of my identity, is my memory, and my excellent memory. I don't want to lose the memory of my sister on her wedding day. I don't want to lose what it felt like to stand on the cliff edge of Oregon, holding my arms out and enjoying the wind. I don't want to lose the idea of sitting with my dad and having a burrito on the coast of Carlsbad. I don't want to lose that. That thought terrifies me. It's one of the reasons why in fiction, anytime there's anyone who has memory issues or as part of a trauma or a traumatic thing or a tragedy, memory loss is on the menu. And that always just kind of gets to me in a way. I'm curious if that hits anyone else in a similar manner. Dory manages okay for herself, but that's because she is literally half full. She literally says that in this film, for God's sake, in case you missed it. But this leads to the sharks. Okay. We know Brucey is still recovering, and we know all of them aren't quite doing this. And by the way, oh my God, that's Eric Bana as one of the sharks, as the hammerhead, I believe. I recognized his voice immediately. I was like, oh, wait, pause the film, go look it up. Oh my God, it is. He has a very distinct voice. Anyways, so the 3 sharks come in, and we have the psych out of the fact that they're going to eat them, but of course they don't. Because fish are friends, not food. Except for dolphins. Screw dolphins. Okay, that sounds like a joke, but if you've studied oceanography, if you know anything about not schools of fish, it's just fish and aquatic life, you'll know that dolphins are kind of dicks. They are big Rule Zero violators, and it actually makes perfect sense that sharks especially would be pretty anti-dolphin. As it happens, we only see, to my knowledge, 2 dolphins in this whole film. Probably a good thing, because they'd be the villains otherwise. We see that she can read. That's cool. And, there's this whole thing where she discovers that, and that's neat. That's all cool. It's all cool. Well, this is also when the film starts to pull its little trick. I think this is one of the better elements of the film from a purely constructive perspective. The pacing is assisted by the fact that there's two viewpoints. We've got Marlin, who is slowly making his way towards Sydney, and then we've got Nemo, who is stuck in the dentist's office, just hanging out in Sydney. And the camera keeps bouncing between these at appropriate points, which helps keep things flowing and helps keep things fresh. Good move. So we jump over, and the first thing I saw is the Highlights magazine. Anyone ever read Highlights back in the day? Am I old? I might be old. Is Highlights still going? Anywho, I've mentioned before the idea that some of the humor in these films is intended for adults. This is probably the most obvious example of that, and I wanted to point it out specifically, because this is, if you could debate if it happened up till now, in this film, no really, they started putting in jokes just for the adults taking their kids to the movies. Because there's the fish whose name is Deb, but you can call her Aunt Deb, it's okay. This is her sister, Flo. I love the idea of fish in a particular area just kind of being really into whatever it is that they're in the area of. Obviously, in this case, they're really into dentistry, and they use $5 words as they're describing. I'm not going to bother repeating them because I don't remember any of them. But they use actual, proper, technical terminology when it comes to discussing dentistry, because it's just fascinating to them, right? And that kind of makes sense when you're exposed to it over time and you've got your own little group, I don't want to say cult, that's completely the wrong word. More like a tribe. That's the word I want to use. When you've got this kind of pseudo artificially generated tribe. Now I can't talk. I swear I have a brain, guys. It's somewhere up there. Artificially generated tribe. It follows logical suit to me that they would just kind of grasp onto things and just kind of really start to get into it, because that's it. That's their life, is that one thing. To use a parallel, let's imagine this aquarium was at a restaurant. And so they see the people cooking, and so they'd be really into cooking. What spices are they using? Oh, she's bringing out the skillet. What kind of skillet? It's the iron. Oh, I don't want to use the iron skillet for that. At least, please tell me she's at least putting it on the grill. No, she's deciding, oh, come on. And you could see how that could then apply, regardless of where the aquarium is. Just food for thought, and something I wanted to share. Another little amusing anecdote. I have heard from multiple people over the years that one thing that people will do, teachers, dentists, doctors, they'll put up something moving so that you have something to look at, something to fix on. And we as human beings tend to be able to pass the time better, for lack of a better way to put that, when we're looking at something that's moving. This is why so many of these places tend to have TVs in them, actually. Now, actually having the aquarium in the room where he does the dentistry, maybe not, but I like to think that that's why the aquarium is right there, so that they can have something to look at and, see the pretty fishies and all that, while something otherwise unpleasant is happening. Food for thought? Either way. Where's my thoughts? Oh yeah, sorry, I'm still on my first page of thoughts here. My goodness. Again, I truncate my notes quite a bit. This is, yes. So the tribe, they're super helpful. Did you notice that? They're super helpful. They're accommodating. They're all quirky in just a weird little way. It's implied later that that's because they're in captivity. And fish aren't meant to be in captivity, so they kind of lose a few screws on the way. And that would make sense. But either way, this is a good time to mention one of the more interesting aspects of this film. There's no villain. I looked ahead at some of the future ones. Well, obviously villains will be a recurring element in quite a few Pixar films in the future. This is, I believe... Yeah, no, I'm pretty sure... I'm going to go ahead and say that this is the first Pixar film to not have a villain. And it will not be the last either. I feel like this is another kind of pushback against the storytelling thing I mentioned earlier. Now, don't mistake me. Obviously, villains can be interesting, in-depth, and complex characters. Incredibles. Obviously villains can be good and interesting characters. But I feel like, at least in part, that as part of the pushback that the creative team was doing against Disney, which favored simplistic storytelling at this point in time, we're trying to have more complex storytelling, which may or may not include a villain. A villain is not a prerequisite for a complex story, though a complex villain can add substantially to a complex story. Once again, Incredibles. So we cut back to the ship. I was actually curious about that because, there's all the mines still there. They cleared all those out back in 48. I'm dead serious. I looked it up. So what the heck are all those mines still doing there? I mean, they're all surrounding the ship, which is almost assuredly the USS Flyer. By the way, did you know the USS Flyer was actually found in 2009? A good 6 years after this came out. Just a little factoid there. So, naturally, both Dory and Marlin go to the Prometheus School of swimming away from things. Probably should shut down that school. It keeps causing issues. Why the weird club initiation scene? It feels like a waste of time, really. Especially since it's just a prelude for them explaining what's going to go on. Actually, there's several scenes in this film that come close to feeling like padding. I know I said the film is tightly paced, but this is probably the first Pixar film where I've noticed scenes that probably don't need to be in it at all and could just be axed. And this is one of them. I don't really get its purpose. They have already clearly and demonstrably accepted and embraced this kid as part of their tribe, so there's no need to have a scene where they accept and embrace him as part of their tribe, Anyways, I love the first-person showcasing of the plan. Moving the camera is always fun and usually a good thing. And this then leads to an interesting sequence of events. First of all, Marlin tries to abandon Dory. This is another padding scene that probably doesn't need to be in the film. Right after it, actually, now I'm thinking about it. Why? I mean, I know he's super concerned about his son, and she's just super irritating to deal with, and, I mean, how could he ever possibly deal with a problem child like that? That just would be beyond his abilities, and... This is as good a time as any to mention the fact that... Well, let me build up to this a little bit. Let's talk about the humor really quick. I already talked about the slapstick back in Monsters University. Monsters, Inc. I always get those two confused. In this case, they go for a little bit more, I don't have a nice way to say this, crude humor. There's actually a decent bit of crude humor in this film. I was a little bit surprised to discover that. Now, no judgment, it doesn't go overboard with it, but I feel like most of that was added to reach the broad appeal that was needed to get the giggles from the kids, because duh, right? Especially in a film that's like this. It'll be interesting to see how they approach humor in the next few films as well, because I don't remember Cars that well from a humor perspective. But either way, Ratzenberger finally has his scene as the entire school of fish. Okay, that was actually good. You got me there. And then we see the environmental threat. Now, this is when things get interesting, and that's why I wanted to hold back my earlier point. The environmental threat of the jellyfish, they're probably the closest thing to a straight-up villain that they have to face in the entire work, unless you count the seagulls, which I don't, because screw them. Also probably the least funny thing about the entire film, while I'm on the subject. So, he goes through, and you'll notice he starts to have fun, and he starts to get into it, and so he starts to take a risk. And he takes a risk, and it fails, and he almost loses Dory. Honestly, if he'd waited another minute, just 1 minute, probably not even that long, Dory probably would have been dead. You ever been stung by a jellyfish? I actually have, off the coast of Southern California once, and I still remember what that felt like. It was a very unique sensation, and I can't even describe it. It was this weird, numbing, stinging, burning weird thing. I don't know, but yeah, that was me. I'm a human. I can't imagine what something about this big would be feeling about that. Maybe this big if you want to really stretch it. So here's the thing. This is when things get interesting, because a lot of fiction would take this as the moment when he learns his lesson. I was afraid, but then the one time I tried something, it failed, and I go back to being afraid. But that's not actually what they do here. This is, in my opinion, the biggest theme of the entire film, and that's why I wanted to discuss this here. Precaution is good, really. Taking care to prevent bad from happening is good, within reason. Obviously, you want to look both ways before you cross the street, just to use a very basic, low-level example of just general precaution. But bad things happen. Bad things are going to happen. That's life. What really matters, what really comes in here, is how you deal with it. I've used this analogy many times of, well, you're driving your car and the car breaks down, or no, you blow a tire. Okay, so you've blown a tire. How do you deal with that? There's actually a lot of complexity I could use with this single analogy, but in this case, all I'm going to focus on is how do you deal with the busted tire? Now, I keep a spare full tire in the bin, and then once I pull that out and replace it, I go and buy a new tire to replace the old spare with, because duh. Sometimes you do a full cycle, sometimes you rotate, sometimes you take the others, but the point is, it's how you deal with the bad that really matters. What does Marlin do? Does he abandon her? Does he rush away of fear? Does his own threat of the fact that he nearly gets killed prevent him from... No. He does something that is arguably very stupid. He does something very dangerous. But he does it to accommodate the bad. Sense make? This, I think, is the actual theme of the work. How we deal with bad, not the overprotectiveness thing, not the familial thing. I mean, I could point out the very obvious fact that he's got a surrogate child to take care of, and Nemo over there has a surrogate father to take care of him, and arguably a whole family, if you want to consider the whole tribe there. You know, obvious. Cool. Well done. Cool. But the real core theme is how they deal with all the bad things that happen. And in this moment, Marlin shows the kind of person he actually is. For anything else that might be, it falls to the wayside when there is someone who needs his help. Go. And he does. And it's interesting to note, he even mentions that he's more used to the stinging than she is. And there's a decent chance that if he wasn't already acclimated to those kind of stings, he might not have managed what he did. So what he did wasn't, completely stupid. He didn't just blindly rush out there. He had a plan of action and knew how to do it and knew what to do with it. And he did it. So they get into the current, start doing the freeway. I love the idea of currents as a freeway in the water, by the way. That's cool. We see the turtle dudes. They're in the wrong area. They should probably be over off the California coast instead of the Australian coast. We see the headbutts. Actually, funny thing, my own niece and I do headbutts as a goodbye thing. I don't even know where that got started. It's just a cute little thing. He mentions that he doesn't want to talk about it. It's like, no, tell us the story. And he's like, okay. So he starts telling the story. What follows is a montage. Now, I'm going to go and admit something that's going to get me mocked on the internet. That's okay. I'm kind of used to that. This was the first feels moment for me. I was so surprised by this. It just hit me out of nowhere. As they're sharing the story, and the montage goes from different group to different group to different group until it reaches Nigel. I remembered his name, Nigel. And he rushes off to tell the crew and to tell Nemo. I was just like... And it took me a good couple of minutes to really process why it hits so much in the feels. It's because that's how we are, really. As a species, we tend to be the kind of people who like to cheer on the little guy, right? We like those heroic stories. We like the tales of the one single father who braves half the ocean, a little exaggeration, in order to try and just find his son again. That is exactly the kind of tale that people latch onto, and frankly, I think is at least part of why this particular film succeeded in real life. Because it latched onto us in exactly that same manner, just like it latches onto them. And because of this information chain, Nigel also has the information he needs to help them win in the end, to get to Nemo. Because he knows, all they know how to get to is a city. Do you know how big a city is? But Nigel knows where Nemo is personally. And now he has put two and two together. He is the point of context, the shatter point for this entire story now. Not the last time he's going to be so relevant, too. This also serves another point. Nemo is so inspired by this that he says, I got this. Because bad has happened. It has. They tried to go into the tube, and they tried to do their plan, and it didn't work. Bad happened. And his reaction was to huddle and cry in terror. And that's fine. No judgment. But how he reacts to it this time is, if my dad can do that, if my dad is doing all that just for me, then I got this. He goes in there, and he gets this, and he does it. Good job, kiddo. And then they push forward with their plan. There's also this really cool point where he learns the turtle's age. I hope you've noticed in the early part of the film where he says, yeah, I know, I'm going to meet some sharks and then some turtles, and I'm going to ask the turtles how old they are. He remembered. This is, so, hang on. I'm looking at my notes here. Yeah, let's wait on that. Dory speaks whale. Okay, you got me there, Mr. Generous. That was a good gag. You got me there. By the way, I looked it up. Humpback whales actually are native to the coast of Australia. For real. I just think that's kind of cool. They probably wouldn't be that close inland, but, whatever. Anyways, there's some really cool camera tricks here. I wanted to point out just one, because there's like 50. But there's one I wanted to point out, because I don't like to point out all 50, unless this is a lore run. There's this bit where the camera pans up, and his hand comes in, and goes down and wipes on the edge of the glass, and he's just like, huh. And then the camera goes through that point and looks through the spot where he wiped in order to show the scene beyond the aquarium. That was a cool shot, and there's a lot of really good camera work like that in this film. Which is funny, because A Bug's Life had some good camera work, too. I know camera work isn't quite the right phrase, but it applies the same way, so forgive me for utilizing it. So they're in the whale, and he's freaking out. Marlin's freaking out, and he flat out says something. You think you could do these things, but you can't, Nemo. Ooh. Now, she misses it. But you can see his face as he realizes what he said. And there's this brilliant part. How do you know something bad isn't going to happen? Her response, I don't. Now, ain't that the truth? Again, what I consider to be the dominant theme of the film. Bad happens, what do you do about it? And there's the unspoken undercurrent of there, which this point right here makes very clear. I guess this is more spoken than unspoken. Don't let the fact that bad will happen stop you from good. Don't let it prevent you. Again, take precautions. But don't stop. So there's a neat little bit where they're trying to get away, and they all swim down in the net. This is actually probably one of the quickest Chekhov's guns I've seen in a while, because they all swim down in the net to resist the person pulling it up, and then he just grabs them with another thing. It's a really quick thing. I wouldn't blame you if you missed it. And then... then they're all... Okay. You got me here, film. Because what happens... Oh, I keep mousing over the wrong thing. What happens is he's freaking out trying to get a hold of this, and there's Nigel is there, and Marlin's like, we're gonna do this, by God. And of course, Carla's just screaming in there because she's been... Probably the closest thing to a villain, by the way, is a cute little girl who just loves fish. Anyways, then it cuts to the waiting room, and the little boy's like... They do a second cutaway later where more people are just like... Not the sounds you want to hear coming from your dentist's office, you know? This leads to the darkest moment. He's dead. Now, believe it or not, that's not actually the darkest moment. Not really. Oh, yeah, it's a very dark moment for Marlin, and the actor, Albert Brooks, I think, does a really good job selling the total dejectedness of it. He's not even a dick about it. Credit to the scriptwriter. Instead of being like taking it out on Dory or whatever, he just says, no, I never would have made it this far without you, Dory. Thank you. But he's so dead as he says it. That leads to the actual darkest moment. Oh, I'm actually tearing up a little thinking about it. Holy crap. I really didn't expect this. Because, please don't leave. I don't want to forget. I don't want to lose this. I remember things better. It's there. I see you, and I can feel it. It is implied that her memory is noticeably getting better. And if you pay attention to the film, you can see bits and pieces of that. While obviously she is still forgetful, she is retaining certain things better. There is a theory To my knowledge, this theory is still not proven, that having an anchor point for memories can help people with this kind of antegrade amnesia, with a situation where it'll help the memory stay or process long enough such that it will actually be shunted down to long-term memory the way it should be. Now, I don't know if that's true. I just mention it because that seems to be the idea they showcase here, that having him, that one static element of her life, has helped her. This leads to the other theme, the second of the big themes that they don't really talk about. Being disabled. Let's go down the list here, shall we? Trauma victim, okay. Anxiety, lack of self-worth. The antegrade amnesia thing. Having a crippled fin. Having a torn fin. How about all the fish in the tank? We see little signs of this throughout the film. They're mostly subtle, but a surprising number of the characters, percentage-wise, all are dealing with something that makes them a little bit out of the norm. A little bit suboptimal. I hate to use that word because it sounds like I'm speaking ill of them, when I'm absolutely not. It's just something that they have to deal with. It's bad. And you see how this ties into the main theme. Because how they deal with it is the important part. Dory has never really dealt with her issues before. Probably because she can't. I don't know if we'll see more of this in Finding Dory. I've never seen Finding Dory, so maybe that'll fill in some gaps there. But as far as this film is concerned, it is her adventure and her time with Marlin that has helped her to adapt and grow and deal with it in a way that she probably hasn't before. Losing that is something that's portrayed as heartrending. The whole film is called Finding Nemo. Nemo was lost, but Dory is lost in a much more horrifying way. Because she's just sitting there, circling this one buoy, freaking out. I don't know where I am. And oh my God, credit to the actress. I had no idea she could do this kind of voice acting. She nails it. Oh, absolutely nails every tone, every heart-rending hesitation, and all of that. Just, every little bit of it. Beautiful, beautiful moment. That's your Pixar tears moment for me, right there. I would be interested to know what yours is, if you have one for this particular film. I'm going to keep track of these as we go, just kind of as a little thing, you know? I mean, we know the one in Up, right? And so, after this darkest moment, Nemo gets out, very clever. He doesn't get out on his own, by the way, you catch that. He gets help from everyone, and as a consequence, in one of the original scripts, oh my God, I can't think of his name. I'm just going to look this one up. Gil, that's it. I was going to say William Dafoe's character. Gil was going to have ulterior motives and be more of an antagonistic character, and at some point in scripting they decided to eject that, and if I might be so bold, I think that was a good move. Having him just be the surrogate parent, the surrogate father thing, I think works a lot better. The way he coordinates the team, gets out there, smacks Nemo out into the drain so Nemo can be free, that's great. By the way, not all drains lead to the ocean. I wonder how many kids killed how many pets with that. Anyways, Nemo gets out and goes and finds Dory and mentions... Now, there's a tiny tidbit here I haven't really commented on, but I've been following it throughout the film. Almost every time that she remembers something clearly, it's something she reads. I don't know if that's on purpose or not, but it's an interesting little tidbit, because when she reads the word Sydney on the pipe, that's when she remembers, and she's like, oh my God, yes, I've got to go. Maybe it's part of that anchor thing again? I don't know. I can only comment on it. This leads to her finding the hey, snap, snap. You ain't gonna make me talk. Hold up in the water. Okay, I'll talk. Why did all the jokes get backloaded in this film? I'm sorry, a lot of the finale here actually makes me laugh quite a bit. And then they have one last obstacle. And, I mean, again, bad happens. You couldn't prevent it. Not really. There wasn't a lot they could do to prevent it with the information they had. Oh, sure, if they knew about the fishing boat and if they knew about the schools, they might have been able to prevent it. But they couldn't reasonably prevent the bad from happening. So now they're in the fishnet. Now, Marlin and Nemo can just get right out. Done. But what about poor Dory? And all the nameless fish. Those are cool too, I guess. Well, you remember that bit earlier about swimming down in order to resist the guy's net back in the aquarium? Nemo remembers that. It's like, okay, we all need to fish down. We all need to swim down. Just keep swimming. Just keep swimming. I gotta be honest, if I was those fishermen and that happened, I probably would have let that one go rather than risking the crane, which is what they do, so they lose their crane. Congrats. Funny fact, I don't like eating fish, so I'm just gonna wash my hands of that whole thing. But they do it. Things work out. He learned some actual decent jokes. That's cool. Brucey's still doing better. Dory is doing okay, as well as she can. Kiddo goes off to school. It's a good ending. And the team get out of the aquarium. Ha ha! We made it to the ocean. Now what? Actually, I have been told they show up again in Finding Dory. Now, obviously, you can say whatever you want about that, because I will have watched that film way before this video goes live, so you can spoil whatever. But I hope that they don't just stay in those frickin' the water baggies until the end of time. I hope they actually get out of there, because that's kind of Sisyphean, isn't it? You know, that's a little bit much. A surprisingly good film, if I might be so bold. I was legitimately surprised. I really didn't expect this to be of the level of quality that it was. So, color me shocked. Next, we would be covering The Incredibles. If you haven't seen my Incredibles Rumination, I'm going to go ahead and recommend you go watch it. I did a lot of research and background on that one, as I usually do. So I'm going to recommend you go watch that and kind of see that in between. Maybe next week, while we don't have a mainline movie Rumination. Because after this, we cover Cars. And we'll get there when we get there. I hope you've enjoyed. I'll see you next time.